to the episode number 4 of Social Dreaming Talks. I'm here today with Tessa Gordziejko and with Kalina Stamenova. We're going to talk about social dreaming as usual, but today we're going to have a little twist, a little spin on creativity, because Tessa is a theater professional and writer. And now I'll pass the microphone to Kalina, who's going to introduce Tessa and today's meeting.
I'm really delighted to introduce Tessa Gordziejko and welcome our viewers. I must admit, the more talks we have, the more interested I personally am getting. So quite a lot of things to learn and whet my appetite. Without much further ado, let me introduce Tessa, who is a writer, performer, director, producer, and dramaturg. She's also a climate activist, blogger, and member of networks of artists making work about the climate crisis. She has been participating in social dreaming and visual matrices for a few years now, and has been really fascinated by how it feels similar to the early stages of creative production through associative working and accessing the unthought. In 2019, she was awarded a grant by Arts Council England to develop her creative practice, experimenting with deeper tools and methods for co-creation. She wanted to explore how artists and communities might use such techniques in collaborative dramaturgy, and also how the individual writer can express a plurality of voices. Whilst the events of 2020 have restricted the extent to which she could expand the activity, she has been hosting a group called The Art of Social Dreaming in regular matrices, with a focus on creativity and responding to the matrix and dream reflection dialogue with writing and images. There are several theater makers in the group, and they have discussed how social dreaming informs or may in future inform our theater practice. When we were discussing with Tessa her particular passion, which is creativity, and we thought there are so many definitions actually of creativity. How do we define what's creative? And I was thinking about the psychoanalytic, one of the psychoanalytic understanding of creativity, like linking in the parental couple to create something new, linking of minds, linking of mental content, ideas, and so on. And I thought, I realized that Gordon Lawrence's work, it's a fact, it has been influenced by Bion's ideas. And in fact, I just realized his book, Experiences in Social Dreaming, is similar to experiences in groups. But I thought, thinking about the conversation, I thought I wanted to share with Tessa and Fabio and the viewers just a small quote from Gordon Lawrence's books about creativity. So I'm reading from Experiences in Social Dreaming. And he says, interestingly, the technology that can release an organization's creative processes and stimulate innovation and further change is social dreaming, an experiential process that frees the individual from survival needs in the present, linking the heart and mind to be available for revelation and epiphany. Dreams are shared and freely associated too, collectively linking our thoughts and feelings, resulting in the deconstruction of group relations that inhibit innovation. Meaning is then freed and discovered, co-creating new experience and understanding. A dreaming matrix emerges and a new knowledge community is formed. And yes, I was hoping that this would be a very good introduction to Tessa's work. And Tessa, we are really interested. How did you get involved with social dreaming? And then how did your ideas evolve and your passion for creativity?
Yes, thanks, Kalina. And that's a really interesting quote from Gordon Lawrence. And there's a few words I'm going to echo later on, I think, from that. But yes, my history of how I got into social dreaming is really important, actually, in terms of how the project that I'm currently doing, The Art of Social Dreaming, evolved and the reasons for it happening. I first became aware and engaged with social dreaming through probably in about 2013, probably. We'd been working with the psychosocial research unit at the University of Central Lancashire. We'd originally met them because they'd been evaluating a big arts project, big cultural project that I had led for the 2012 Cultural Olympiad. Many of the sections of that project were kind of socially engaged pieces of work that happened in different places. So they were doing quite a broad sweep evaluation of what was a very big project. And so we got to know the team, and within that, I found out about social dreaming. That if there's people watching who may know Dr. Julian Manley, who's written quite a lot about social dreaming and is particularly interested in creativity, and his colleagues. And there were sort of two aspects that particularly interested me at that time in how they were using social dreaming. One was as an evaluation tool, kind of for socially engaged arts projects. So particularly participant art projects, social dreaming, using that as a sort of evaluation tool for how participants had responded to it and what was happening kind of in the group that were working on these projects. And then the other area that I was particularly interested in was how Julian in particular was working with social dreaming in the field of climate psychology. And through the Climate Psychology Alliance, which I became involved in. But I'm really interested in how kind of collectively and unconsciously we respond to climate change and environmental threat in ways that we don't necessarily consciously think about. So the psychology of denial, psychology of sort of fear and grief, you know, what's happening there. So those are the two areas that I was really interested in. And in 2013, 2014, I was working with some colleagues on a performance project about climate change and climate psychology in particular. And it sort of started to influence how we approach that work. And I started going to quite a few social dreaming matrices that both University of Central Lancashire were running and other people, and sort of getting the feel for how they worked. And there's two things really that struck me from around creativity and the social dreaming matrix. One was how similar it felt to, there was a kind of familiarity about it on one level, which it felt quite similar to the early stages of being in the studio with artists making a project, starting to just do a lot of associative thinking, some kind of deep dives into some of the content and our own feelings about the content and things like that. So that was, it sort of, I know for some, and you know, I was aware that in some of the groups, some of the academics who hadn't come across social dreaming before weren't necessarily that comfortable with it because it felt a bit sort of unacademic, I suppose, in some ways. But I was it was a wonderful way of exploring, and particularly there was one particular session that we did with the somatic movement team at UCLan. They did a big somatic movement session with us before we did social dreaming, and that was just amazing. And all sorts of stuff came up in that session, which were also coming up. So in that matrix, there were lots of stuff coming up. There was also coming up in an arts project that I was doing with a group of artists who weren't there in that matrix, but there were lots of things around the sea and around grandparents and things like that. And it also, I also started thinking about this term that listeners might be familiar with, which is rhizomatic thinking. And a rhizome is a plant that has a common root that goes under the ground, and then the plants pop up in different places, like an iris is a rhizome. So the idea of rhizomatic thinking, that there's this common root of the unconscious that runs underneath society and underneath our thinking, and it pops up. And I used to see a lot of theatre, sort of small scale experimental theatre, that kind of thing. When that was a thing that we could do, I used to go 3 or 4 times a month or more. I became really aware, particularly one year, that I'd seen a lot of things about that had got grandparents in them, as a sort of central narrative kind of technique or character, and as this sort of font of authentic wisdom that sat inside the narrative. And it's like these artists aren't all copying each other, but this theme is popping up in different places, this kind of grandpa theatre theme. So I'm thinking, yes, different artists will be, these things are popping up within the arts world. And so it's not because they're copying each other, it's because they're sort of having the same thoughts at the same time, and they don't quite know where they come from, but they manifest themselves in all this different work. So I was really interested in that as well. So the whole thing to me felt very like artist collaboration. It felt like there was a lot of potential there to work with it as a creative force, but also to work with audiences after shows or pieces of art, to see how they responded to it immediately afterwards. So one of the things we did in 2015, we did another piece about climate change, which was 3 poets and a musician and a projection artist, called Breathless. And it was a live piece of performance in a studio, and the audience were encouraged to dance at certain points because there was a kind of side breaks track running underneath it, and the audience were encouraged to dance because we were aware that some of this material was really dark, and some of it was about sort of floods and fires and things. And afterwards we did, Julian ran a social dreaming visual matrix it wasn't so much a dreaming matrix, more of a visual matrix with the audience or a group from the audience immediately afterwards. And that was really interesting to see how the images from that had emerged. And they weren't necessarily images related to the show, but there were very strong other things that had come through from the audience that had experienced that piece. So overall, I was in about between 2015 and 2019, I suppose, I was on a personal journey, which was about, I had been a producer and I was executive director of a theatre company, and So I was involved in sort of facilitating the creativity of others. And I think over those years, I started being aware that I wanted to bring my own creativity more into the mix of the work that I was doing. And in 2019, I made a big change in life, which I sort of became a full-time creative artist. And as you say, I got a grant from the Arts Council to do a piece of creative development, which had the general title of The Story of We. And that came from sort of two places, really. One was this feeling around climate change, that there was a way to make work around climate change and around the environment that somehow dug deep into these sort of deep stories and deep narratives that were there, shared among us. And connected to that was the sense that the background of Western art has been almost entirely individualistic. I've been to see a lot of pieces, a lot of theatre pieces, which were basically biographical theatre. You know, the theatre maker making a show about what it's like to be me. So, and I was starting to be much more interested in how we could make work about what it's like to be us. And there's a theatre maker called Chantal Bilodeau, who's a French-Canadian theatre maker who'd been working in the Arctic with communities up there. And she had said that she was convinced now that the aesthetic of making theatre about climate change was an aesthetic of community and communal voice rather than individual voice. So it was this desire to move away from the individualism behind Western art and move into that. There's some Indian theatre makers as well, and Gandhi said it himself, finding that place where you integrate the artist and the individual with the community and the voice of the many. And social dreaming seemed to be one of the tools that was really important in that. And all these different ways that I'd been thinking about how social dreaming might interface with creativity kind of came together in my plans for this, which was, it was going to be about co-creation, with that word which Gordon Lawrence used, and freeing the individual again. So it using social dreaming as a starting point, really, and then that was going to go on. I was going to work with a local community theatre, with their people's theatre in the studio, try and find a dramaturgy that would come out of social dreaming. And that started kind of early, well, February 2020. And I think we had 3 live sessions, and then we went into lockdown. So then I kind of sat and pondered for a while and tried to work out, figure out how we were going to continue it and what was going to be possible. And people were just starting to do social dreaming online. I think at that point it was kind of, will it work, won't it work online? But actually, obviously, there's a lot of it happening online now. So we started the art of social dreaming online. And the good thing about the pluses about that were that we could have a really, people who weren't necessarily local, so from different parts of the UK and beyond. But also, well, as I'm sure everyone who's done any online social dreaming know, it is different to being physically present in a space. You don't have the embodiment that you have of being in a space with people, but also it brings other things, and the screen itself becomes almost part of the dream, sort of almost dreamlike in itself. So the invitation was to be involved in a series of matrices. I was quite keen that people would, do more than just a sort of drop in or attend one series, and that we would maintain some kind of continuity with the group. So we had the same group more or less for the first 8 matrices that we ran. It started in sort of April 2020, and it went through that amazing kind of green, verdant, warm spring where people were out in nature a lot. And as after each matrix, well, what we did, I'm just going to share the screen. I'm sorry this isn't quite seamless, but I'm working on an iPad.
Oh, that's fine. Yes.
So I'm just going to find a so can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So that is after each matrix within our dream reflection dialogue, we made a mind map, and the way we did it was I literally drew this as we were speaking, and I had another screen and another screen that I did that on, so that kind of evolved as we were talking. And after each, so this was I think this is the one from the very first virtual matrix that we did, and you see it had this like cave and trees at the center of. That was actually the lead dream, about a cave looking for a red-headed man, sort of hero, who was going to come and save us and protect us from the threat in the cave. So we'd make this mind map as part of our dream reflection dialogue, and then the group after that were invited to go and in the sort of intervening 2 weeks to produce something that came up, something creative as a response to the matrix and the dream reflection dialogue. So this was one that came out of that very first one. This is actually a collage, which is quite interesting because the matrix is sometimes described as a collage or a tapestry. So this is something that somebody in the group who is an artist made after that first matrix, which was about the cave.
That was during lockdown. What you are just presenting is the online matrices that you tried when the lockdown started. Is that?
Yeah, this
okay.
is one of the creative responses to those matrices. I'm just going to share a few more images and also a few poems. So this was one. So that first one, this was something that somebody who's a photographer did. She went looking for a cave, but she found this tree that was cave-like, and she created this this picture about the cave. I'm also going to just read you a poem, because quite a few people did, including myself, did poems. So I'm just going to find a poem which was written by Jenny Wilson. I don't know if Jenny's listening, but I'm going to read it. It's called The Space Between. Where am I? Do I know you? I think I've been here before. Your face, it's familiar. It's hard to tell in 2 dimensions. Can you hear those children playing in the distance, the passing of a car? It's quiet. Is it Sunday? But there's no bells. The trolleys are upside down. Are you still here? There are lines and arrows on the pavement and green shoots in the cracks between. A breeze on my skin, warm sun. I feel it. Do you feel it too? I walk, doom-laden, restless, sleepy limbs, heavy, masked ghosts passing in 1s and 2s. Wide berth, is that a smile in his eyes? Grey, brown, hazel, green leaves, blue skies, blue bells, daffodil yellow, ransom white, bell blue. Can you smell them, my love? And fresh grass beneath us, bed of life, cold grounded where we lay together. Oh, outrageous rainbow. Look, darling, do you see it? No, wait. Let me shield your dazzle eyes under the trees now. Quick, unfurling canopy, ancient shelter. I offer you my hand, my fingers tip cold air. My arms ache with the burden if their emptiness. I think I can almost remember your touch. Are you there, my love? My arms fold gently round the trunk, my feet firm roots below, my head filled light beams. It's just me and this tree and my heart beating on. So that was very much a response to the tree and the idea, this very green imagery that was coming through in those early, I'm just trying to. So this is another collage that came from our blue period, which happened a bit later on in the series, and another blue painting. This was another blue photograph because within the one, there was one particular matrix where we had a lot of blue, and there was also a lot about elevators, lifts, and so this was one of the photographs. And I also I wrote a poem called Blue, but I'll read that to you later. And also bubbles came through, so that was another one that Ruth did. And there was one matrix later on in the series where there was a lot about, I think the walls started closing in on us around that time, and there were a lot of dreams and associations about people crying on the other side of walls and people being in cubicles and being very closed in tiny spaces. And this was a poem I wrote from that matrix called The Cubicle. On the other side of the wall, crying or laughing hysterically, a thin wall just inches away, a woman, crying, of course. Laughter is shared, touched, side-splitting, uncontrollable, hollow, hysterical, or infectious. It arrives in a burst, spurting clear liquid, a leaking pipe whose sides must be held together. No, not laughing, crying, inhaling jagged breath like a chainsaw, a rising assonance, a piece of pain, thin, oily water dribbling across the road, joining with another trickle, stream, rivulet, and yet many gathering in the gutters, rising across the pavement, a torrent moving towards the wall. There are boundaries, you know, barriers that denote your zone, your sobs, a cubicle to contain the rape and death threats, a tiny space to compress the swellings from sting barbs still throbbing in your flesh. The yellow water under our feet is the powder of crushed blossom. Not disgusting, do not fear it, tread softly, barefoot, walking on dreams, liquid dust and stuff melted into air, into thin air, which cannot be breathed, which can only be sobbed, which is red, white, and blue, but mostly red, which we do not touch because touch is not allowed. We lose touch. A tiny box of screens and faces fills with the sound of a woman crying unseen in the next cubicle. So I can't remember whether there's anything else on this. Oh yeah, and the other thing that's happened in some of the later series is that people have just, in a way, they've taken the matrix out with them, because there's this kind of, the same people are involved in the same series. So this is a piece that one of our matrix members took out on her run, and it sort of reminded her of something from the matrix. So the matrix goes out with people now as well, and kind of sort of develops a life of its own. And this is something that we did actually in the dream reflection dialogue one time, which was we'd actually did some drawing there and then, just whatever came. So that was part of our dream reflection dialogue. So one of the things we do, I'll stop sharing now because I've done that. Okay. So one of the things we do, I think, is I think when social dreaming is used within a psychological or a social psychological context, there's often quite a lot of work done was the dream reflection dialogue, and there's quite a lot of further work done where teams might gather and do further interpretation of the dream reflection dialogue and build working hypotheses. And I think we've kind of, because we're not really, or not all of us are from that background, the difference with the art of social dreaming is that these responses are hypotheses, if you like. They are creative hypotheses, and they also bring in different references as well. So, you know, sometimes, as I say, we'll take the matrix out and we'll find other things that connect with things that happened in the matrix. And that's what the poem will be about, or the painting. So it's been, yeah, and I was just actually going to show, I don't know whether anyone who's contributed any of those images is actually listening, but do drop a comment in the comments box on YouTube if you are, because it would be nice to know if there's any of our participants here.
It's very interesting what you're saying about the content in the matrix, what's being, you know, the associations and the links which are created in the matrix, and this visual and poetic creativity which seemed to flourish after the matrix, and it would be really curious to find out, is there a link? And I quite agree with you. We might be able to build working hypotheses. You see, this is what happened in the matrix, and this is the result. You know, kind of confirming or disconfirming in a way. But it's really a creative. I'm really curious. Do you invite people who are artists to these matrices? People who are poets and writers, and also when do they produce this additional creative work? I mean, whether making photographs or making the pictures, is it right after the matrix, or is it continuing some time after that? That's really interesting and quite innovative.
Well, it usually comes about a week or two after the matrix, so I think it needs a bit of time to kind of like percolate almost, you know, to for the images. And certainly for me, I find I review the notes from the matrix and from the dream reflection dialogue usually the week after the matrix, and then send them out. So it's quite often when people get the notes that might trigger something. I think there's a couple of things as well. What's interesting is some of the work has reappeared in later matrices. So one of our matrix participants had a dream about the piece that she'd made from the earlier. She'd made a piece. She'd done a piece in which she talked about a dream, and which was actually that cubicle session in which she'd been loading a dishwasher and she'd heard a woman crying on the other side of the wall. She then made an artwork out of that, which brought in some of the other things from the matrix as well. And then she had a dream later on about that artwork, about showing it to a friend and it being a lot smaller than she had expected it to be. So it was kind of like the work reappears. There's almost like a cyclical process because we do a series and it tends to be the same group. There's a kind of cyclical process that goes on. And what we then do is at the end of the series, so our first series was 8 matrices, we did a kind of meta reflection across the 8 sessions. So I put all the notes together and we sort of reviewed all the notes, and then we did try to come up with some hypotheses around what had happened over the 8 sessions. And those were quite interesting because there had been recurring images that had, there was one, toilets had come up so much, cubicles and people having to go to the toilet in a place that was public, where they were exposed, this sort of sense of public exposure. And over the course of 8 matrices, we got a real sense of this. Susie Orbach talked about, I think, the outside impacting on the inside during the pandemic. How things come inside from outside, and there's almost like there's the barriers between privacy and outside of. There's people watching you and people, neighbors spying on you, and that sort of state of uncertainty and state of unsafety seemed to permeate through a lot of those toilet images. So we did come up with quite a lot of hypotheses at the end of the series, sort of, and then we did a second series, and you asked, you asked who the people are. Some of them are just people who are completely new to social dreaming, just really interested in it. A couple of people who've done it before, who had done it before this session. There are a couple of people in the group are visual artists, and there are, I think, 5 theatre makers now in our current group, and we have actually had a meeting with the theatre makers to talk about how the social dreaming practice might impact and is impacting and might impact in future on our practice. And we're going to try to take that forward as a collaborative exploration, which is kind of where I started off from, but with lockdown, we weren't really able to do that. And certainly one of the theatre makers in the group who runs a theatre company that works with refugees and people who are displaced in some way. So they work on the major theme of displacement, and she says it's really, really informing their work very, very strongly, particularly the sort of embodied aspect of social dreaming, and working with their participant group. So yeah, it's a real mixture of people in the group.
I was just thinking with you, and I'll be very brief because we might have some questions from the audience, but I found myself listening to you and thinking how actually the dreams represent very vividly the anxieties that we are all having during the pandemic, and how we want to get rid of these anxieties as if flushing them through a toilet. They're so painful. They could be so painful, and we are all sort of doing it, but also creativity as well as a way of dealing and mastering the anxieties, and what we call in psychoanalysis repairing. Anyway, I'll stop here. Because
I think what's interesting there as well is that because we've got people who've been in from the start, we'll go in our dream reflection dialogue, we can almost like shorthand back to some of the earlier stuff. We're back in the toilet, aren't we? It's kind of like, we'll all know what we mean, because we mean, yeah, we're back on that theme that we had 6 months ago, But we do at each fresh series, we do open it up to new participants. So we try to keep the same participants during the series and then open it up to new participants at the beginning of a new series.
Is there any particular reason you want to have a steady group of the same participants during the
Well, for that cyclical reason, really, in that we get that mirroring and iteration of things running from between sort of intermatrix as well as within the matrix itself. So that kind of meta reflection at the end of a series is really interesting because it gives, and also because what's been really interesting is I think each series has happened during a different season. So the first series was spring and summer, sort of most, sort of because it was a long series, and then the second series was winter, and then the third one is spring. And we've had kind of like themes for the second one was living in dark times, and this one is new awakenings, emergence of creativity. So I think it's quite good to have this. It's just the way we do it. For this particular project, I think having some continuity of matrix membership is quite powerful.
Yeah, I would like to go to the chat because we have some questions, and I want to invite the people who are watching to open a dialogue, even if they don't have questions, just to say hi. We're here, and just we can chat as we say. But I have actually one question and two questions from Martin Walker. The first one is I'm reading both, and then I'll let you go right after. And the first one is a technical one. What is the difference between a visual matrix and a dream matrix? And the second one, Martin asks, what are your thoughts about, he's giving his opinion, and then he wants to hear yours, is, in my opinion, a reflection period after the matrix runs the risk of reductionism under the guise of working hypotheses, while your example of art following a matrix feels more to me like a dialogue between the matrix and the ensuing felt experiences. So these are two.
So the first question about the technical, well, my understanding of the difference between the visual matrix is a sort of development of the dreaming, of the sort of pure dreaming matrix, in that it's not just about dreams. It always also brings in associations that people might share, connected with dreams or connected with other associations. So that's and what we do really is a kind of hybrid, I think. But I would say that what I've done mostly has been more in terms of what I experienced before I started hosting matrices were probably more visual matrices. And so in that respect, that's what I've been more familiar with. But I'm not, there might be a more technical answer to that, but that's what my understanding is.
But what do people do in visual matrices?
Well, it's pretty much the same. It's run very similar to the dream matrix, but my understanding is that the dreaming matrix was originally just about dreams, and that now it's about also associations and other things that come into that. So I think probably what most of us do is now what is known as a visual matrix, but that's what they used to call it anyway in what Julian used to call it at University of Central Lancashire was the visual matrix, as opposed to distinct from a purely dreaming matrix, which I think. So what was the other question? The thing about the dream reflection dialogue. I mean, it's interesting because Steve Volk, I think you asked him about having the dialogue afterwards, and he said he always does a dream reflection. He sees it as an integral part of the matrix, and I think we do as well, because I think stepping outside sort of matrix mode into evaluative or reflective mode is quite an important stage in it. I've always done a dream reflection dialogue in matrices when I was sort of participating in them and learning about them. And that was always quite an important part of it, and a sort of staging post really between the matrix and whatever comes after, which is either going on to do further interpretation or to do a kind of creative hypothesis. So for me, the dream reflection dialogues are really, you know, we sort of noticed what was there. And in terms of becoming reductive, I don't think we lose. I think you need to kind of still read the reflection dialogue notes and alongside the richness of what was actually in the matrix. But I think it's a different process. Yeah.
Yeah, here I think Martin was referring in between metrics. So if you let art flow in between metrics, is actually enriching, or it's helping making bridges, while sometimes just, you know, using working hypotheses or using just the language may be faulty in this transition. So I think it was referring to the fact that the power of images and visual art has been, and it's probably good in this. And he also makes a point that maybe has some history punctuation to put that dream matrices were never only about dreams, but I guess visual metric at a certain moment they used any other image that could come out and that could be created or summoned by the participants. Yeah, but I have a question myself actually, which came out earlier, because you were talking about the fact that, you know, that the metrics work as a rhizome, and basically that's how you reach like a wider creativity output than the single parts, than the single input. But have you ever noticed, or is there something that may block this process while during a dream matrix? Because of course we know when things go well, we are all satisfied and we have this output. But have you ever experienced a situation where this was not coming, and have you identified what could be possibly the reason or some obstacles to this process?
Do you mean in the matrix or writing afterwards?
Both, like kind of the output of the matrix that doesn't achieve what was set to, in terms of creativity output.
Yeah, some weeks we don't have much creative response. And some, you know, some matrices will have quite a lot of stuff. So the blue one, we had loads of stuff after the blue one, what I call the blue matrix. But others we won't have. And I think, I don't know why that is. I don't know whether it's, sometimes there's just a sense of whether there's a kind of, for me personally, I mean, this is what's interesting, I think, because at the end of the day, because of where we are, we're going away and we're doing individual creativity. And so all the, you know, all the miseries that beset individual creativity, writer's block, and, you know, sitting in front of the blank page and bashing yourself on the head, it's, you know, all those things. We're back in our own rooms looking at our individual creativity, which is why I'm really looking forward to being able to take some of this stuff out collaboratively. But the really interesting, I mean, I do think I write differently from the matrix. I think one of the things is that you come out of the matrix with a really, really rich palette of images, and finding out how to use those images and associations and ideas and themes in a way that actually makes sense outside the matrix, outside the people who are in the matrix, I think is another thing again. But I had a really powerful experience after, I think it was the second or third. And I was, I knew there was something I wanted to write about, which I did write about a few matrices later, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. So I went, okay, I'm going to just put that aside for now and think. And I was actually right in the middle of, I'd been stuck on a poem which hadn't come out of the matrix. I'd started it months before. It was about my father being in hospital following a stroke. And I kind of got stuck on it. And then suddenly after one matrix, and really quite soon after the matrix, I sat down and I finished the poem. And that was really weird, because suddenly it was like the community of the matrix, or whatever it had been, had somehow just unblocked something for me. Because it was a very personal poem. So it wasn't a poem but there was a lot of green in it, and there was a lot of stuff around that season. And I suppose some of that stuff got released. But I thought it was just interesting how it had the matrix itself at that point had just unblocked something.
That's really interesting, because the social dreaming matrices are called social and they are supposed to be benefiting the group, but actually, and I have experienced that myself as well, also participating, and also you can get individual benefits. You can get something for you individually from this social enterprise. Yes. Yes.
I think there's something about connecting your brain at that deep level to the brains of others. I mean, I think it is the social dimension. It is that deep connection with other people, which is something that we all need, and particularly need at this time, because we don't, we tend to sit on Zoom meetings and do business, but the social dreaming makes that you do get a deep connection to people.
Do you think this is the reason why the online social dreaming matrices suddenly mushroomed and flourished so much? Because they seem to kind of meet a need for people to stay connected in these times when we are isolated and so disconnected. Could that
yes be? I think probably it's one of the things that I most enjoy doing on a screen. I spend quite a lot of time on a screen, and I tend to, get fed up with it sometimes, because you've got meetings and this and that and the other. But it's one of the things I most enjoy. And it's partly because, during the matrix, you switch your camera off, you sit back, you sort of go into that state of reverie. You try to almost like step back from the screen, and you've just got the voices. But there is something, and that's, you can kind of almost recreate the snowflake layout in that way, because you're not staring directly at other people's faces. You kind of sit back and we always invite people to either switch their camera off or look away from the screen, not look directly at the screen. And then it's nice when people come back, and we do the dialogue and we can see each other, and and I think one of the things about having the same group, and some people in the group have been there, in it for a year now, is it does become quite a social group, and you sort of feel safe and trust people in it. And I think that helps open up. We've had discussions about what we feel safe sharing, or what we feel, okay to share in dreams.
I have another comment from Martin. He loved to hear the poem because it feels like it was coming out of the matrix. So he had the character of a daydream always. Almost like it's because it was created through the matrix. So he conserved this reverie type of feeling, I guess. Yeah. Do you notice that the production? I mean, you probably had yourself experience in, writing or doing theater. Anything you've been dealing with and doing it after the matrix or through the matrix. How different do you feel it? Do you notice differences in your creative output. I guess the story of we in party
yeah
coming from there.
And and we did talk about it, as I say, in this meeting we held with the five theatre makers that are in the group, and how we were also thinking differently about our future work. So as well as the actual writing, a lot of our work at the moment as theatre makers is kind of thinking and planning. And I think for one of the things that I'm doing is, as well as writing, a collaborative project that I'm doing is a project called Pampiric with another theatre maker, and I think it's changed the way that we're thinking about the content of that piece of work as well. It's kind of freed it up into a much more into something that is going to carry a much stronger community voice with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And anyway, we are approaching the end of the transmission, and I wonder if is there one last thing maybe Kalina or Tessa want to say before I close up. I want to thank the viewers for coming and for showing up. The Captain UK and Martin Walker have been vocal. Also the others, I want to thank them also as well. And yeah, any final thoughts about social dreaming and creativity?
I'll probably leave the final word to Tessa, but I just want to say that at the end of the conversation, I'm left with more desire and more hunger for more. I really would like to learn more, and it's just the beginning of a very interesting conversation. So
thanks.
yes. But
yeah,
last words to you. Yes.
Well, it's been great talking. And the only thing that's weird, and it's this kind of, this thing that we're all doing with these YouTube and Zoom and stuff, is it's kind of weird not being able to see who's there. And that connects with a theme that we've had in our matrices about ghosts, how and actually the form of the matrix, the Zoom form of the matrix, enters the matrix itself, so that all the kind of the screen, all the people on the screens are like ghosts, and then there's some more ghosts that I can't see as well, who are the people who are watching. So it's but thanks to all the ghosts, and I hope you become corporeal to me at some stage.
We had this idea with Fabio also to record and sort of document the conversations, because we think there's quite a lot of happening which people need to know within social dreaming about each other and with the wider world, so to say, but also to document what has been happening in these rather difficult times. But thank you so much, and thank you to our viewers. And if we have somebody saying something in the chat from the viewers, do let us know.
Yes, they say thanks for the interesting discussion. I want to remind people that next Friday we're going to be here with Michael Klein, and we're also going to talk about social dreaming and social choreography. And it's all for now. The time is running, so we will be in touch, and feel free to continue this conversation by sending us questions, leaving a comment, subscribing to the channel, or any action that can keep us going together is good for the community and for everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks, Kalina, and thanks, Tessa.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Fabio, and to all the viewers. Thank you.
We will be back. Bye-bye.
We'll be back.